There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive with sirens or thunder. It creeps in through the back door of your life, wearing familiar clothing. And by the time you recognize it for what it has already made itself at home in every room. I know this because I lived it for 23 years. My name is Gerald. I'm 58 years old, and until 14 months ago, I believed that loving someone quietly, swallowing your hurt, rounding your sharp edges, choosing peace over pride, was the noblest thing a man could do for his family. I believed that the measure of a good husband was how much he could absorb without breaking. I was wrong, and it took my daughter's wedding to show me just how wrong I had been. I met Connie in the spring of 1999 at a mutual friend's backyard cookout in Columbus, Ohio. She was 31, recently out of what she described as a complicated situation with a man named Trevor, a man she mentioned just enough times in our early months together for me to understand that he had mattered to her in a deep and disruptive way. She never elaborated beyond that. Complicated situation. I accepted it the way you accept weather, not because you understand it, but because you have no real alternative. What I did understand was this. Connie was magnetic. She walked into a room and people turned. Not just men, everyone. She had a laugh that sounded like it belonged in a warmer country, and when she looked at you fully, you felt briefly chosen. I felt chosen. That feeling, I would later learn, is its own kind of trap. We dated for 2 years. She fell pregnant with our daughter Alicia in 2001, and we married the following spring in a small ceremony at her parents' church in Westerville. I was 35. I had never been married before. I came into the marriage with an open suitcase and a full heart, ready to build something that would last. And we did build something. A home. A life. Alicia, then 4 years later, our son, Patrick. I worked in civil engineering. Long hours, decent money, the kind of job that keeps the lights on without ever making anyone famous. Connie worked in pharmaceutical sales and was exceptional at it. She made friends everywhere she went. She collected people the way some women collect shoes. Trevor came up occasionally over the years, not often, but enough. A comment, a memory surfacing unexpectedly at dinner. Once, when Alicia was about 7, Connie received a phone call and stepped out onto the back porch to take it, staying out there for 40 minutes in November with no coat on. I watched her through the kitchen window. Her body language was completely different from how she stood when she talked to anyone else. Looser, more open, like something in her was exhaling. When she came back inside, I asked who called. "Old friend," she said. I didn't press. That was my nature. I didn't press. There were other moments like that one over the years, moments that I filed away, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I had convinced myself that pressing for answers was a kind of weakness, that a secure man didn't need to interrogate his wife about her past. That trust was demonstrated through silence. I see now how badly I had confused trust with avoidance. Alicia grew into a remarkable young woman. She had Connie's magnetism, but my steadiness, a combination that made her the kind of person others gravitated toward without feeling overwhelmed by her. She studied marketing in Cincinnati, met a good man named Owen at 24, and by the time she was 27, they were engaged. The wedding planning consumed our household for 16 months. Connie threw herself into it with the energy of someone half her age. Venue tours, florist consultations, catering tastings, dress fittings. She was in her element, organizing, deciding, curating. I was happy to be in the background. I paid the bills, drove where I was asked to drive, nodded at fabric samples I couldn't distinguish from one another. It was easy for me to be happy then. My daughter was happy. That was enough. The wedding was set for the second Saturday in October at a vineyard event space about 40 minutes east of Columbus, about 200 guests. Owen's family came in from Michigan and the Carolinas. The weather that morning was clean and cold, the kind of autumn sky that looks almost painted. I arrived early with Patrick, who was serving as an usher, We helped with setup, moving a few chairs, checking in with the coordinator, making small talk with Owen's family. I was relaxed. I was genuinely, completely relaxed. I remember thinking, standing in that vineyard with the golden oak trees and the linen tablecloths, that this was one of those days you store up for winter. One of those days you return to when the world feels grey. Connie had gotten ready with Alicia and the bridesmaids at the venue's bridal suite. I hadn't seen her since the morning. When guests began arriving, I positioned myself near the entrance to greet people. That is when I saw him. I didn't know who he was immediately. I saw a man, late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a dark suit that fit him the way expensive things fit, people who are accustomed to expensive things. He was laughing at something as he came through the entrance, and then I saw that Connie was beside him. Her hand was on his arm. Not the polite hand of an acquaintance, the settled, familiar hand of someone who had touched that arm before. She was laughing too. I stood very still. The thing about shock is that it doesn't feel dramatic in the moment. There's no film score. Your body simply goes quiet, and your mind starts doing arithmetic it doesn't want to do. I watched my wife walk into our daughter's wedding on the arm of a man I had never met, and some part of me already knew, before anyone said a single word, exactly who he was. Connie saw me across the foyer, and her expression shifted, just slightly, just for a second, before she arranged her face into something composed and moved toward me with him still at her side. "Gerald," she said, "this is Trevor. He was in town and Alicia invited him. She's always adored him, you know how she is." The rest of the sentence became noise. Trevor. Of course it was Trevor. He extended his hand. I shook it because I am a man who was raised to shake extended hands, and because my daughter was somewhere in this building in a white dress, and I was not going to do anything to shadow her day. Not yet. Not in that moment. "Great place," Trevor said, looking around the room. "Alicia did well for herself." "She did," I said. Connie was already turning away, steering him toward the seating area, chatting with the warmth she reserved for people who made her feel fully alive. I watched them from where I stood, and a slow fire started somewhere low in my chest. I found Patrick near the bar. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He looked at the floor. "Mom said you knew." "I did not know." He looked up at me with the expression of a 22-year-old who has just realized he's been placed in the middle of something too large for him. "Dad." "It's fine," I said. "Today is Alicia's day. It's fine." I said those words because I believed them, not because I was being noble, but because I genuinely intended to hold myself together through the ceremony and the dinner and the dancing, and then deal with the rest afterward. I had 23 years of practice at holding myself together. One more evening would not break me. I was wrong about that too. The ceremony was beautiful. I want to say that clearly, because what happened afterward should not be allowed to erase what happened during those 40 minutes in that wood-beam chapel on the hill. Alicia walked toward Owen, and she was incandescent. Owen cried before she was halfway down the aisle. I kept my eyes on her face the entire time, and for those 40 minutes, everything else receded. The fire in my chest cooled. I was just her father. Nothing more complicated than that. Then the ceremony ended, and the reception began, and Trevor was at the table adjacent to ours. Connie moved between tables with the ease of a woman entirely comfortable in her own narrative. She introduced Trevor to people as an old friend of the family. She laughed at his jokes. She touched his shoulder when she leaned in to say something private. And Trevor performed the role of the charming, harmless guest with the polished fluency of a man who had never once in his life been required to account for himself. I drank a glass of water, then another. I ate something. I don't remember what. At some point, Owen's uncle sat beside me, and we talked about the Detroit Lions for 10 minutes, and I was grateful beyond measure for those 10 minutes, because they gave me somewhere to put my attention. Then Trevor walked over. He had a glass of bourbon. He sat down in the empty chair across from me with the ease of someone sitting in his own living room. Connie was across the room talking to the caterer. "You and Connie doing okay?" he asked. The question was perfectly constructed. Casual on the surface, a blade underneath. "Fine," I said. He nodded slowly, looking out at the dance floor where the first song had just started. "She talks about you," he said. "She's always talked about you." "Is that right?" "She loves you," he said, in exactly the tone a man uses when he wants you to understand that love is a consolation prize. "She's always loved you." And then he leaned slightly forward and smirked, a small, private, devastating smirk, and said, "Relax, it's just a wedding." I have thought about that moment every day since it happened. I have turned it over in my hands like a stone, examined it from every angle, asked myself whether I could have responded differently, whether a better man, a calmer man, a more evolved man, would have let it pass the way he had let all the other things pass. Maybe. But I am not interested anymore in being the man who lets things pass. I stood up. The motion was calm. I wasn't shaking, wasn't red-faced, wasn't performing rage. I was simply, finally, finished. My right hand moved before the rest of me had fully decided, and I hit Trevor once, clean, hard, across the jaw. He went sideways off the chair. The bourbon glass shattered on the hardwood floor. The room went silent the way rooms do when something real happens inside them. I stood over him for exactly 1 second. Then I stepped back, straightened my jacket, and turned to find Connie already crossing the room toward us with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between horror and a guilt so old it had gathered dust. "Gerald," she started. "I need you to leave," I said. "This is our daughter's." "I know whose day it is," I said, "which is why I'm asking you to leave quietly instead of having this conversation in the middle of it. Take him and go, right now." People were watching. Owen's family. Our family. The photographer, somewhere certainly. Connie looked at me for a long time. The mask she wore, the one I had watched her maintain for 23 years, the one that said everything is fine, Gerald is fine, we are all fine, slipped. Underneath it was something I recognized as a kind of exhausted relief, as though she had been waiting for me to finally draw a line, and was almost grateful that I had. She left. Trevor, to his credit, or perhaps his cowardice, did not make a scene. He straightened himself, collected whatever dignity he could from the floor, and followed her out. I found Alicia near the wedding cake. Her eyes were wide and glistening. "Daddy," she said. "I'm sorry," I said. "Not for what I did, but I'm sorry you saw it, and I'm sorry it happened today." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she hugged me, hard, the way she used to hug me when she was small and the world had frightened her. "She told me you knew he was coming," she whispered. "I never would have invited him otherwise. I swear to you." "I know," I said. "I know, baby." Owen appeared at her shoulder and gave me a nod that contained more understanding than most speeches could carry. "You all right, Gerald?" "Getting there," I said. I stayed for another hour. I danced with my daughter. I shook Owen's hand approximately 11 times. I watched Patrick do a surprisingly good job on the dance floor with a bridesmaid from Dayton. I ate a piece of cake that I tasted absolutely nothing of. Then I found my coat, walked out to the parking lot, sat in my truck, and did not move for a long time. The drive home was 41 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way, needing something concrete to hold on to. The house was dark when I arrived. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and waited, though I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Connie came home around midnight. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me. I looked at her. We were two people standing on opposite sides of a distance that had always existed, but had only just become visible. "I should have told you," she said. "Yes." Alicia asked if she could invite him. She grew up thinking of him as almost family. "I told her you knew, because She stopped. Started again. "Because I didn't know how to tell you the truth, which is that I didn't ask your permission because I knew you would have said no." The honesty of that surprised me. After everything, the performance of the evening, the spectacle, the years of managed distance, she chose this moment to be direct. "How long?" I asked. She understood what I was asking. She sat down across from me. "We ended it completely when you and I got serious. I want you to believe that." But we stayed. I stayed connected to him, not physically, not for a very long time, but emotionally. He was someone I could never fully close the door. 23 years. I had shared my life, my bed, my children, my savings, my worry, my ordinary Tuesday evenings. I had given every unremarkable and sacred thing I had to a woman who had spent all of it standing in a room with a door she couldn't close. "Did you love me?" I asked. I wasn't angry when I asked it. I was just tired, and I wanted to know. "Yes," she said immediately, "fully. That's what I need you to understand. What I felt for you was real. What I still feel is real. But there's a part of me that I never—" "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the thing I hadn't allowed myself to know for 23 years. I had always known. The November phone call, the way she laughed differently, the half-finished sentences, the distance that appeared and disappeared without explanation. I had known, and I had made the choice, over and over again, to unknow it. Because I loved her, and I loved our life, and I believed that choosing peace was the same as choosing love. It isn't. Choosing peace, when what you need is honesty, is not love. It is slow erasure. You erase yourself, year by year, compromise by compromise, until the man looking back at you from the mirror is a perfectly maintained ghost who no longer makes demands because he has forgotten that he is allowed to. I had forgotten for a very long time. "I want you to stay somewhere else tonight," I said, "and for the next few nights, while I figure out what I want to do." She nodded. She didn't argue. I think she had been expecting this conversation for years, and the waiting had been its own kind of exhaustion for her. She packed a bag and left to stay with her sister. I sat at the kitchen table until almost 3 a.m, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting, just breathing, relearning the dimensions of my own house without another person in it. I filed for divorce 4 months later. It was not a decision I made quickly or lightly. I spent those 4 months talking to Patrick, who handled it with more maturity than I deserved, to Alicia, who cried and blamed herself until I sat her down and told her firmly that she had done nothing wrong, to a therapist named Dr. Okafor, a quiet man with an office full of plants who helped me understand that what I had been doing for 23 years wasn't patience. It was self-abandonment. There's a difference, even if they look the same from the outside. I talked to a pastor. I talked to my brother in Pittsburgh. I talked to myself on long drives through the October countryside, the same landscape that had framed my daughter's wedding, now stripped of its leaves and honest in its bareness. And I talked to Connie several times in the living room of the house we had shared, with the careful distance of two people trying to be decent to each other in the aftermath of something that can't be undone. She didn't ask me to take her back. I respected her for that. She said she was sorry, not in the automatic way of someone performing remorse, but in the slow, thorough way of someone genuinely reckoning with what they had cost another person. Whether that was enough to rebuild something, I couldn't say. I know only that it was not enough to make me stay. Some things, once you see them clearly, cannot be unseen. Not because you are unwilling to forgive. I have forgiven her, in the way you forgive weather, in the way you forgive anyone for being exactly who they are, but because forgiveness and continuation are not the same thing. You can release someone completely and still understand that the life you built together has run its full length. The house sold in February. We split things with less conflict than either of us expected. She moved to an apartment in the Short North District. I found a place near the river, a second-floor unit with a balcony that catches the afternoon light in a way that still surprises me every time I step outside. I am a different man now than the one who stood at that vineyard entrance watching his wife walk in on another man's arm. Not better in every way. Lonelier, certainly. There are Sunday mornings when the quiet of the apartment presses in around me, and I feel the full weight of starting over at 58, the strange, disorienting freedom of a life with no plan. There are evenings when I make dinner for one, and the smallness of it catches me off guard. But I am more honest now, with myself, above everything else. I know what I will accept and what I will not. I know that love cannot survive on one person's willingness to swallow, that a relationship sustained by one partner's perpetual accommodation is not a partnership. It is a performance. I performed for 23 years. I was very good at it. I do not intend to perform again. Alicia calls me every Sunday. She and Owen are expecting their first child in the spring, and the thought of being a grandfather, of being present and real and clear-eyed for that small new person, fills me with a kind of purpose I haven't felt in a long time. Patrick moved back to Columbus last year, and we have dinner on Thursday nights at a barbecue place near his apartment. These are the things I hold on to. The punch, I am told by some people, was wrong. I understand that. I own it. I am not proud of the act itself, only of what it represented, which was a man finally, at 57 years old, deciding that he was worth defending, that his feelings were worth acknowledging, that there is a limit to what a person should silently accept, and that reaching that limit is not weakness. It is long overdue honesty. Trevor, as far as I know, remains Trevor. Silver-haired, charming, and someone else's problem. Connie, as far as I can tell, is rebuilding. She seems lighter, in the photographs Alicia occasionally shows me. I'm glad for that. I mean it genuinely. I do not wish her difficulty. I wish her the clarity to close the doors she has spent her life leaving open, not for my sake, but for her own. And me? I am here, on my river balcony, in the afternoon light, learning what it feels like to take up my own space. I spent 23 years making myself smaller so that someone else could stay comfortable. Her world didn't fall because of what I did on that October afternoon. It fell because she finally looked across a kitchen table at midnight and saw a man who had stopped disappearing. And so did I.